Thank you, Desiree. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we're now going to have a bit of a chat about that. I want to introduce our other two panellists who are going to join us. You may have, please sit down, don't you have to stand on ceremony. You're in Australia now. Yesterday, you may have seen in the news the High Court did a big thing. They declared the practice of indefinite detention of people in our immigration detention gulag system unconstitutional, which drives a big... blows a big hole in our system of treating asylum seekers like criminals. And one of the moving parties in that case was the Australian Human Rights, the Human Rights Law Centre, which is where Kieran Pender happens to work. So that's the relevance. So Kieran is the founder of the Whistleblower project within the Human Rights Law Centre, and it's Australia's first initiative to provide pro bono legal representation to whistleblowers, together with advocacy and law reform to strengthen protections for them. And if you know anything about whistleblower protection in Australia, you know it's shit. So Kieran is globally recognised in this field. He's been doing a lot of work in it for a long time. He previously worked at the International Bar Association in London on whistleblowing best practice, and with the Seeley Institute in Prague. He's also an honorary lecturer at ANU and a writer of spicy law columns for The Guardian and the Saturday paper. Our other final panellist is Mele-Ane Havea, who is the co-chair of bLab Australia and Aotearoa New Zealand, and also owner of one of the most diverse and interesting CVs I've ever read. So Mele-Ane is a corporate law refugee, founding CEO of the Small Giants Academy, and she's covered many roles in the Small Giants group. Previously director of the Impact Investment Group, an investment fund using Maori values and principles to invest in communities. Absolute guru on the subject of good governance and embedding integrity in purpose, and also the nicest person I know. So I would like Kieran and Mele-Ane to join us, and we will get chatting.
Well done.
So Kieran's one on the end. Yeah, thanks again for telling us the story. I was sort of one part of it that struck me was just the sheer the human dynamics of that scene in the boardroom. Because if you've ever been in a big corporate boardroom, you know they're designed to intimidate. Tell us a bit more about what that experience was like at a human level.
It was very disorienting. I called it the upside down world. I knew when I joined this company something is off, or at least with my boss, the CEO, something is off. Couldn't put my finger on it. And so I'd often come home and just say, it's the upside down. Because I would address, I'm the head of ESG and G's governance, and some really big mama issues. I asked about, there was an investment in a company called Wirecard, and Wirecard was Germany's largest corporate scandal default. Basically the CEO more or less said, we made the investment because, some of our PMs like to go out drinking with CEOs and CFOs. And, during these, get-togethers, these social events, with alcohol, people talk and we get information that others don't get. Isn't that great? And we trade off of that, right? And it was and I'm sitting there going, did he just boast about insider trading? It was and then I'm thinking it couldn't be. So that's what the experience was like, where I'm sitting, addressing something that has legal ramifications and being dismissed. He'd always say, you're so paranoid, Desiree, you're American, you and your American friends, meaning the DOJ and the SEC. You people are so, you're so anal and paranoid. And the DOJ had basically fined Deutsche almost 20 billion over the last few years. Right? It is something that you're supposed to pay attention to. It was disorienting. That's for me. It was disorienting. There was a time where I just thought, am I in Alice in Wonderland? Is this can't be happening?
Do you think there was a cultural element to this, coming?
Yes.
You had a long history in banking, so you'd met a lot of evil people, and had somehow reconciled yourself to that. So it's not like you weren't literally Alice in Wonderland. You had form. But yeah, obviously there was something qualitatively different about this particular scenario, this particular context. And I was just wondering, was there a cultural difference from the American context and the attitude there to governance?
Yes, it's totally different because the regulator has a light touch on regulation. So people are often surprised when they hear me say this, but there is a cultural element where financial crime in Germany is no big deal. It's white-collar crime. Who gets hurt? What's the big deal? What's so terrible about insider trading, right? So there's this cultural nonchalance towards financial crime, and the regulator has been publicly criticized because it often, the financial regulator protects big business, the big banks, not investors. So, and there have been stories about the regulator turning on whistleblowers, actually reporting the whistleblowers back to the company. So that has driven this light touch on financial regulation, almost no enforcement actions. As a result, I often felt it was a market where where these banking executives were doing whatever they wanted to do. There was just this disregard towards regulation and law enforcement.
You said that you don't regret it, but was it like an instant, well, there is nothing else I can do, I have to take this step? Or
Yeah, there were a lot of nights with bottles of wine, and it was really tough. But yes, when I realized I'm likely not to get another job and I have to work, you start going, I just moved to going on automatic pilot now. Let me figure out the best way to work with the media. It was my first time doing it. I've had some media experience before on launching deals, but never, when you hand something over, it's frightening because once I handed over the documents and I made a statement to the Wall Street Journal, it's their story. What if they paint me as just this horrible, disgruntled employee using the female card, right, to get money? I don't know what they're going to say. So it was very, very scary, but I can say the team that was assigned was a team that broke the story on the billion-dollar whale, 1MDB. These were great professionals. They were very clear with the rules of the game. I just had to have faith in, very experienced, high-caliber journalists. But it's a very scary process, and then the article comes out, and it's there's my face in the Wall Street Journal, and that fired executive blows the whistle on greenwashing, and you're oh God. But the article itself was, I thought, very balanced and supportive. But it's a grueling process, and you have to be committed to going through the ups and downs, and just staying positive, and you have to focus on reinvention.
Yeah. So, can you tell us a bit more about that? I read an interview you gave, and you were talking about, in terms of sort of the lessons you learned, I guess if you did it again, what additional steps would you take to prepare?
I wish, in a way, I would have just gone directly. So there is a lot of whistleblower protection in the U.S. So I was based in Frankfurt, and our regulator was the BaFin, this German regulator, who I did not trust. And I wish I would have gone straight to the US. So I have a lot of tips for other whistleblowers. There are a lot of things, some things I did right and some things I didn't. But you get automatic protection in the US. You're also eligible for something called the Whistleblower Reward Program. So if there's an investigation, number one, your legal costs have to be paid by your former employer. So, and that's a big impediment for a lot of whistleblowers, is to bear the legal cost. But now you're stateside in a system where, and this did happen to me, that even though I didn't sign up for the Whistleblower Reward Program, I didn't go to the SEC, they came to me. I was still under the advance agreement, so Deutsche Bank had to pay all my legal costs going through this. That just takes so much burden off of you. But yes, the Whistleblower Reward Program in the US, if there is a fine over $1 million, you are eligible for 10 to 30% of that penalty. And that came out after the financial crisis with the Dodd-Frank legislation, where they beefed up whistleblower protection, and that is, very helpful. I don't know if I'm eligible or not. Like, time will tell. There was a penalty, fingers crossed, but I didn't do it regular way. I didn't sign up, which you're supposed to. I went to the Wall Street Journal.
Kieran. Obviously, Australia is best practice in this area.
You should have come to the Australian regulators.
Yeah, man, you did. Yeah, living the easy life. Now, what actually is what's the situation here? How far? What's like compare and contrast?
Australia doesn't have very good whistleblowing laws, and I think that should trouble all of us. I listened to those comments and about the doubts you had and the challenges throughout the process. And I think about how many whistleblowers aren't speaking up in Australia and what we don't know as a result. On Monday, in the ACT Supreme Court in Canberra, there's a whistleblower who's going on trial who blew the whistle on war crimes in Afghanistan to the ABC. And I think about his case, other whistleblowers, what we know about how many whistleblowers in Australia are fired when they speak up, are sued when they speak up, are now facing prosecution for speaking up. And I think about the people that didn't have the courage to go forward, perhaps an irrational courage. I think most people, given that state of affairs in Australia, given that the laws don't work, given the lack of support, would make a rational decision that I'm not going to speak up. But all of us suffer as a result. How many front pages, how many royal commissions, how many inquiries don't we have in Australia? The wrongdoing that goes unchecked because people can't speak up without fear of all of that retaliation. And that should worry us, A, because tomorrow any of us could become a whistleblower if we go into work and we see something wrong and we speak up. But then also because of the impact that all of that wrongdoing cumulatively has on our society when it's not going held into the spotlight. We all saw what happened with Robodebt, and there were numerous whistleblowers in that as that unfolded. But our only mechanism at the moment is a Royal Commission, really. Yeah, I think Robodebt's such a good example where some people did try and speak up, and they weren't listened to, and other people stayed silent. And I think about what we could have avoided if those who had spoken up had been heard, or those who stayed silent did speak up. Literally, human lives, billions of dollars, a whole Royal Commission, we could have avoided if at the beginning a few people spoke up. And the problem with our current system and the lack of laws and the lack of support is if we don't get all that right, we're just going to keep repeating those failures. And in 10 years' time, we'll have another Royal Commission and we'll all be saying, oh, why didn't we act? Why didn't we stop that, nip that in the bud? Well, the reason's obvious, because on Monday, a whistleblower's going on trial for telling the truth.
So what's the aim of the project?
So I think the American example is so helpful because the US has really led the world in protecting whistleblowers for decades now. The rewards program is seen in Australia as very controversial. Why would we pay whistleblowers for doing this public service? But I saw an example recently where an American whistleblower blew the whistle on wrongdoing in a consulting firm. Not that we know anything in Australia about that. And that whistleblower helped the US government recover $400 million, and the whistleblower got a cut of about $60 million. And just compare that to in Australia, where we have whistleblowers going on trial. Compared to getting $60 million. That speaks to, in the US, the system of support and processes. Both the law is better, but then also there are support systems for whistleblowers. There are lawyers that dedicate their work to this area and that act for whistleblowers for free or on a no-win, no-fee basis. In Australia, we have very little of that. So the impetus for the Human Rights Law Centre setting up our whistleblower project, which has been in the works now for about 3 years, and we formally launched in August, was that if you're a whistleblower in Australia, where do you go? Very few lawyers with the expertise. Those that do, lawyers are not cheap, typically. I'm free, so that's nice for my clients. But there's that absence of support. And I would say to people, like literally tomorrow, you're at work, you see something wrong, where do you go? We don't have a dedicated whistleblower protection regulator, and unless you can afford to pay for a lawyer, there's nowhere to go for support. And so that was really the impetus for us saying, look, whistleblowers need better support. The laws aren't working, the processes aren't working. Whistleblowers need the Human Rights Law Centre on their side to help them navigate these processes and expose the wrongdoing. So since we launched, we've been inundated, which is not good. So I've been a bit busy, but it's really fantastic that we've been able to get this off the ground.
Mm. But you see that, do you see it as like an interim step towards like a better regulatory environment and a genuine government response?
Yeah, exactly. So the federal government has said it's committed to whistleblower protection reform. That's great. We haven't yet seen that come to fruition. So we need that reform. We need it really urgently. We've been calling on the government to set up a dedicated whistleblower protection authority. Labor at the 2019 election said they'd do that. They've forgotten the 2019 election. They've walked back from that commitment, and at the moment they're only considering whether they'll do that. But we need the systems, the processes they have in the US. There's always going to be a need for lawyers to help whistleblowers, but we can do a lot more to create the ecosystem. I think all of us have a role in that, right? As a society, we need to protect and empower whistleblowers and treat them as heroes, not as villains. It's interesting, the doyen of American whistleblowing law, a guy called Tom Devine, who's worked in this area for 40 years, he says he speaks to a lot of company CEOs who say they love whistleblowers. And then you point out whistleblowers in their company and they say, oh, they're not whistleblowers, they're dickheads. and I think that's something for all of us to reflect on, that whistleblowers can be inconvenient and can bring out inconvenient truths, but we all need that at a societal level and then within our own organisations. We've got to protect the people who speak truth to power because we all depend on them.
Thanks. Yeah, so Mele-Ane, I was going to ask you a tricky question, which is, we could play out an alternative scenario here. DWS has got caught out by Desiree lying and greenwashing to a fraudulent extent, and if they'd called you in at that point, before they sacked her and called her names and doubled down, what would you have advised them?
Mm-hmm. Imagine that. I love that this conversation has covered both structure and culture, because I think that when we talk about next economy governance, which in many ways is an alternative way of organising and making decisions, one that is more, you could call it purpose-driven governance or conscious governance, and one where a system where if voices are coming forward that are countercultural or are saying things that we don't want to hear, then those voices are listened to. That's the kind of vision of what good culture would look like in this area. And so I suppose if I was to have that opportunity and come into that, I imagine, very intimidating boardroom, I'd sit down with those people that have power and I'd talk to them about how decisions currently get made in their organisation, and I'd try to encourage them to find a way of, first of all, working with those people that have power, and trying to bring their own self-awareness and consciousness and responsibility to the fore, so that there's a kind of, first of all, a commitment to conscious leadership. I think that's an essential part of good governance. And then the second thing is having the processes which would allow for these different voices to come forward. And we've all been in situations where you've had something happen with a boss, and maybe you don't agree with the way a decision's been made, or it feels unfair, and the only person that you've got to go to is that one person. And so looking at ways, at communication channels, and making sure that there are not dead ends, that there are alternative places to go. And so that's kind of a structural answer. But then the second part of that is really around culture and around psychological safety. And what does that actually mean in organisations when there's power in a room and there's somebody trying to speak truth to power? How does that really work? and what kind of things can you do to create a culture of psychological safety? And that really, I think, starts with a commitment from the person who's holding the most power. And so, I think it would involve deep work with the CEO on that point. So I think that's probably where, it's a bit of a rambling answer, but this idea of, I guess, designing fit-for-purpose governance structures is really about, I'm looking at the word right on this slide, it's really about starting with purpose and starting with your values and working out how at every step of the way those values are what guide you.
I agree. I mean, I've always said that you learn what the true values of an organisation are when the shit hits the fan, and how employees learn what the culture is and what the values are is from the response they get when they say something awkward. So if they come forward and say to you, I don't like that, or this, I don't like, can we have a conversation? And you're like, get back in your box. Then they learn from that, and that permeates right through. So yeah, I agree. I mean, if the only viable organisational response has to come from true values and purpose. But that's this world. Yeah. In that world, Desiree, because it was an extreme situation, what you had uncovered was wild. It's like the war crimes equivalent in the banking industry, and so and they were out there. It wasn't like it wasn't an internal problem. It was outward facing. They'd already disgraced themselves. What could they have done? How else could you see that playing out that would have been could have potentially been really good?
So here's the problem that, today there are so many kind of fake systems. So the company will say, we have a dedicated whistleblower channel that's anonymous. We have an audit group that can investigate. We have general counsel and compliance. We have HR that's driving good cultural reforms on mental wellness, and we have all these these benefits for employees. The truth is that for some badly run companies, right? Because I've also seen some good companies. I worked at JP Morgan; it's a good company, but some badly run companies like Deutsche Bank, it's all these. It's fake. Those mechanisms are there. So they just didn't follow them. That's the thing. But they have everything in place. What they sought to do because I reported directly to the CEO, I didn't use the whistleblower hotline. That's ridiculous. I was in a seat. I was an officer myself. I'm at the table, right? Why would I go and anonymously do it? So, I went direct. My CEO ignored me, and then I wrote. So DWS is a division of Deutsche Bank. I then wrote to Deutsche Bank. And I wrote to the head of the board, the chairman of the supervisory board of DWS, and the president of Deutsche. I was dismissed there as well. And then they hired they hired a consultant from PwC. And you gotta love this. So what they were supposed to do, of course, is listen to my concerns, investigate it, and if need be, hire external legal professionals to come in, an external law firm to come in to investigate. That's how it should have properly have gone. Instead, what they did is they're such idiots. They hire this guy from PwC, a local guy, who's always doing their cleanup work. So whenever they get in trouble, they hire this one guy who writes the report, right, that nothing bad was done. There was no misconduct, right? So in this case, they hire this guy, and this guy writes this report. They make a public statement. We have done a thorough independent investigation, and this investigation concluded that there is no basis to Ms. Fixler's allegations, and there was absolutely no misconduct. They hired the guy that I had hired for 400,000 euros. So I was forced when I was there. They wanted me to hire a consultant on our net zero pledge, and there was pressure from the CEO to hire PwC. I didn't realize that PwC was there was some sort of cozy friend relationship or whatever was going down. But I had hired him on a commercial consulting project for 400,000 euros. And the same guy was hired to investigate the greenwashing claims. Of course, he's not going to bite the hand that feeds him. There's a conflict of interest. And PwC didn't bother to do a conflicts check. And the same idiot was the one investigating it. So you can imagine what the U.S. Department of Justice looked at this and said, what the F is going on here, and ripped it up. And then they had to hire Sullivan and Cromwell to come in. But again, seemingly they'll always use frameworks and structures and saying that we did everything the right way. But it was a massive cover-up that badly backfired for them.
Kieran, we see a lot of that in Australia as well, these sort of instinctive institutional responses, both for corporate and government level, to the appearance of process and response, but actually whitewashing by design. What's the antidote to that?
We wouldn't know anything in Australia about these consulting firms doing the wrong thing, would we? Transparency is the antidote, and we have to have that real commitment to it, the leadership level commitment that transparency is hard, but it is always the right response. We see this, I was at an event with former Senator Rex Patrick last night, and he made the point, it's only from the opposition benches do you say that you love transparency. Whatever stripe is in power, suddenly transparency goes out of fashion. I'm an optimist, so I hope that that's not true, and I will continue to prod the government to do better on transparency. But I think in the corporate sector and in government, we've got to be transparent. That avoids a lot of this, because if you're transparent about your shortcomings as well as your successes, then whistleblowers don't need to go public because it's already in the public domain. And I think in different areas we're seeing more and more of this. In the context of workplace sexual harassment, organisations are being more transparent about their processes and publishing annual reports about the number of inquiries they've undertaken and the sanctions imposed, etc. That transparency is important, but then you've got to live your values when shit hits the fan, as you said, and suddenly you've got... there's just such a temptation to go after the whistleblower. I think one of the structural challenges we have in our legal system is often you've got the whistleblower on one side, you've got the wrongdoer and the company sort of aligned in their interests in covering it up, and that means that all of the focus is on silencing the whistleblower. We're seeing, in some large companies, more and more focus on independent support internally and externally. Companies supporting whistleblowers when they speak up, paying for their lawyers. They're particularly, it's rare that one praises the big banks, but in response to the Royal Commission, they've done a lot of work. Some of the big banks have independent whistleblower offices within them, well, independent question mark, but that I do genuinely believe are doing really good work supporting people who speak up. To loop back to the war crimes whistleblowing, the Brereton inquiry into war crimes in Afghanistan made this observation, which I think is true for all of us across all sectors. The way we encourage people to speak up and we encourage cultural change is that the people who blew the whistle need to be seen to prosper. Not just not suffer, actively prosper, because the courage they showed in speaking up is so important to the organisation. So I think we need to support whistleblowers in all companies, in government, and sending a whistleblower on trial, suing them, firing them, obviously does not do that.
Do you advocate the US system of bounties?
That's a very vexed question in the whistleblowing landscape, but I do. And particularly there's in addition to the reward scheme, there's a system that allows whistleblowers to sue companies on behalf of government. And then the government can take over that, and the whistleblower gets a cut, or the whistleblower can continue to run it. And the US government has recovered hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars every year from this mechanism. And I always think, if you've got to give the whistleblower 10 or 20%, do you want 100% of zero or 80% of billions of dollars? It's good for the system. It creates the structural incentives and the processes to support whistleblowers, and it works. So again, this is something the Labor Party at the 2019 election promised to implement, and yet we just haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, I don't want to suggest that Australia is actually the worst in the world. I was reflecting on Saudi Arabia's approach to managing whistleblowers. It's to bring them into the embassy and chop them into small pieces, which I think is probably worse. Desiree, you said, you often get asked, do you regret it? And your answer is no. But I want to ask you a slightly different question, which is, and in the context that you recognise that this was the end of your corporate career, and you would have to completely reframe yourself and do something different. Are you happy with your choice?
So the answer is I'm becoming happier because I'm back on track to earn money to support myself and my kids, and I love what I do now. Like I like to, even though you labeled me a wanker banker, I still loved it. So yes, I was a wanker banker, but I enjoyed it. But I have to say that I enjoy what I'm doing today more, because I'm dealing with such a larger variety of stakeholders in society. And I'm not representing a company, so I get to freely speak. I'm not filtered, right? And so that's cool. But I have to hustle, right? I have to, always out there. I have to find opportunities, right? And so there's less financial security. But I do love what I do. But again, I don't even think about what could I have done differently, or do I have any regrets? When you're in the boardroom and you're being asked to lie and sign off on that, not only because I know I'm in scope of the US system, so I know that not only can the company get in massive trouble, I can individually get in trouble. So for me, it was a very black and white situation, right? Because I didn't want to be called out by the US authorities, and they will find it. They will see that internally I disagreed and I challenged everything, and then I sign off on it. I'm the GIMP, right? And so I'm the fall guy. And so I recognized, and so it was for me a black and white situation. It was absolutely no.
Yeah, I'm going to ask each of you this question. So somewhere in the audience, someone is sitting on the biggest scandal in Australian corporate history, and they're itching in their seat and thinking, well, should I just stand up and say it now? I mean, if you want to. This is a safe space and we're all supportive. But I asked the question for them, and if they were going to ask each of you, what's your advice? What's your advice?
The first thing is try and, as best as you can, emotionally detach. It's easier said than done. Try and stay fact-based. What documents do you have? What meetings? Dates, times, write it all down and look at that fact pattern. So try and stay as evidence-based as you can. And also just try and see if there's a mechanism to find an ally to share the concerns with, right? Don't go in there in an accusatory way, just like factually, like here's a timeline, here's like, risk reports I have, whatever, documents, and find an ally. If not, find, a good lawyer, nonprofit or contingency, have that discussion. Find maybe a U.S. nexus, right? That's always a good one. So, for me, I had that U.S. nexus because my company was based in Germany, but 25% of their business was done stateside. So I could establish that nexus. And know your watchdogs. Like, get up on, employment protection. I hear what you're saying about whistleblower protection, but is there, some sort of understand your jurisdictions that you're working in, your industry watchdog, employment law. You might be, able to look at other jurisdictions. The UK offers whistleblower protection. Read up on others who have gone down this path. Those are some of the tips that I give.
Mele-Ane?
Can I let Kieran go first, just because I was going to take it somewhere else?
Absolutely.
Possible?
Talk to me first. hrlc.org.au/whistleblower project. Michael's firm kindly does pro bono work for us, so you can get the best of both worlds. You can have Michael and me. I can't emphasize that enough. Get advice first. So many people come to me after they've blown the whistle internally when things have already gone wrong, and you can't unscramble the egg. But I think my key piece of advice is there can be a happy ending. We unfortunately see many really horrible stories of the way whistleblowers are being treated, and they really underscore the challenges that people face in Australia when they speak up. But I have clients who you have never heard of, who've always remained anonymous, who have led to front pages, who have led to revelations in Parliament, that have subsequently moved on with their lives, moved employers, gone on holiday in Europe, had a good time. It is possible, can't guarantee it, but it is possible to speak up safely and lawfully, achieve impact, be able to look at yourself in the mirror, be able to go to sleep at night, and walk away unscathed.
Amazing. I just wanted to speak from a slightly different perspective, because my area of expertise is not really whistleblowing, and whilst I find this an incredibly important conversation, and really grateful for all three of your work, I'm just thinking about the people who are in the audience who are leading purpose-led businesses, and I'm really conscious that as we rightfully as a society become more and more aware of whistleblowing, that there's a kind of corresponding potential anxiety for those business leaders who are wanting to talk about and showcase their really important work. And during your keynote, Desiree, you spoke about how one of the challenges or one of the terrible implications of what was happening with your organisation's fraudulence was really the fact that it was undermining really good work in business communities who are raising the bar on what it means to bring purpose to life in organisations. And so, I've read about this idea of green hushing, where organisations who are doing good in the world are too scared to talk about that good work because they are rightfully aware of greenwashing, but they're not necessarily the ones, you're not the ones that need to be afraid of that, you're the ones that need to be shouting from the rooftop about what good looks like. And so, I just, to everybody who might be in that situation, I want to say there's, returning to your values and then being really clear about measuring what matters, which is, what we do in the B Corp world through the BIA, the Business Impact Assessment. When you start by actually making sure that you can substantiate the claims that you're making, then that's the position that's a powerful position. That's the one that you want to start to be basing all of your marketing and your storytelling on. Not a fear of being called out, but a strength, a place of strength and power. And so I kind of encourage everyone to be really conscious and aware about making sure that you're really starting with the fundamentals of measuring what matters and what impact you want to make, so that you can tell the story.
Yeah, I agree. And we can, as purpose-led businesses, as part of this is about leading by example, and we're all going to have situations where we've screwed up, and if we come back to our values, which always include transparency, and we respond in a transparent way, then we are setting an example for less evolved corporates to think, oh, actually, there would be a different way. We could not lie in the first place. That would be good. Yeah. Now we've got a little bit of time for a few questions, and I think there are microphones around. Yep. So put your hand up if you'd like to ask any of the panelists a question. We'll go with that one first.
Thanks, everyone, for your words of wisdom. Desiree, I wanted to ask you, you said you had got your dream job. You were so excited to be helping manage these funds that were purporting to do good things for the environment and for society. Having burst the bubble, as you put it, how much faith do you have in ESG impact investing in general? How crap do you think it's gotten? How many examples do you think there are in the sector? Because everyone puts a lot of faith in it, and we look to it and we reach to it and we hope that it's doing what it's saying it's going to do. Is that hope well placed or not?
Well, I think by and large, most of the ESG investment funds are do no harm funds. It's investments in large companies, healthcare companies, technology companies. They're progressive companies, but that's very different from impact. So, ESG, by and large, what has been outed is that the vast majority of ESG assets under management fall into a category called ESG integration. That's where you're looking at how the outside world might affect a company. So you're looking at actual financial performance. You're not looking at environmental or social impact. And when we look at, Morningstar says there's like $3.7 trillion of sustainable investments out there. Bloomberg says the number is close to 40, trillion. The reality is that impact investing is only 1 trillion, is really small. And that is what I think, when people initially heard of ESG, they were assuming that is about making investments that offer financial returns, but also very key environmental and social impact. So this isn't scaling, that's the reality. But we're in a better place today. We've called bullshit on a lot of this whole ESG hype, right? That needs to go away. ESG should just regularly be included in an investment process, right? You should be considering its enhanced due diligence. The world is rapidly changing. We need to adapt and understand those different risks. And we need to figure out how to scale impact investing. And a lot of that, we're going to need public-private partnerships with development agencies that countries have, all the DFIs, development financial institutions, and the multilateral banks, using that public sector money and using that money as catalytic capital. That is the concessionary finance that you leverage to bring in private investment, from pension funds, from insurance companies, from family offices. And now that's where I do a lot of work, is to focus on trying to scale impact investing. The whole ESG thing, I think it's just going to go away, right? It's just going to become regular way investing. And now we need to focus our attention on properly scaling impact, because we're not doing enough.
Hello. Yep, over there.
This is a question for Desiree as well. It seems that sometimes the people in big organisations that behave badly are often rewarded for that behaviour. And I'm just curious, that CEO that you worked with, obviously he lost his job, but I'm wondering, what's been the impact on his career? Is he hustling or is he working for PwC?
Yeah, I mean, it is true. Like I say, like, the bad people got in trouble, but yeah, no, he got another job. He's now the CEO of a real estate fund management company. So no, he did, but it was a, understand, still like big, status drop in life, going from running $1 trillion, company to now a fund that it's still big, 50 billion, but these are very different numbers. And he's under criminal investigation. So the federal police still have an open personal investigation into his actions. So, I mean, there could be jail time. Now, I don't know which way it's going to go. But yes, unfortunately, too often we've seen leaders, that have been outed for misconduct only to get another job or become a non-executive director. We don't do it enough in holding these executives to account. But in my case, I can say like a good 7 people were ousted in senior leadership, and they have smaller jobs today. And I'm sure, it just burns them that the little girl got them, right? Because rumor had it, they called me she can't, again, there's a gender angle to this, right? To say they always call me the little girl. She's roadkill. It's so easy just to, and to this day, they can't fathom, right, how I was staying in my parents' basement with 2 active thumbs, but working with the media, and I did have a lot of them, a great deal of support. I did have a support system, and I was lucky to have my legal fees paid for, right? That was very, so I was fortunate to benefit to the U.S. system. But yeah, working with the media and just staying the course and staying fact-based, it was humiliating, for these guys. But yeah, they're all still gainfully employed.
Hi, I've got a question for you, Mele-Ane. I work for a business that has B Corp status, and we're currently undertaking recertification. But in particular, when it comes to governance within bLab, B Corp, the wider B Corp community, and transparency, I think there have been many of us within the B Corp community that have felt like there has been quite a bit of lack of transparency within B Corp. I can think of 2 examples. Personally, I love using the B Corp register. I've noticed businesses that have achieved B Corp status with 1 score, and then I've come back to check a few months later and that score's dramatically dropped, and yet there's been no communications as to why that is. Obviously, another more well-known example is Nespresso and the argument, how can a big corporation that has human rights abuses attached to it ever qualify for this community that's trying to do better? So I wanted to hear from your perspective working for bLab and B Corp on the transparency within the B Corp community itself.
Thank you for your question. There are 3 things that I want to say, and the first is just how the transparency around the scores work, and the way that works is that B corporations undergo this process of certification, which your business is we're going through at the moment. It's quite a rigorous process. There's an online free assessment that you work through, and then it's verified by an external third party. And so what happens after that verification process is that a company either reaches the requisite 80 points and then they become a B corporation, and then their score and details about their scoring is published on this on the website, on the bLab website. And if there was a discrepancy between the score, it's likely that what happened is that the company was just undergoing that that verification process, because I can't think of any other reason why it would change. And if you do have any more specific details, I can definitely get the team to check and confirm exactly what happened there, because that does sound quite odd. And the second part of your question around Nespresso joining the B Corp community is a conversation that we've had a lot of late. What happened when the B Corp community was started about 12 years ago is that it was made up of these very committed, often smaller, founder-driven organisations who were able to make a real impact through their business and were able to walk the talk very clearly, because their organisations were a lot smaller. A lot of them were SMEs. And the broader vision for bLab and B corporations that you're kind of signing up to, the broader vision has always been about the role that business can play in economic systems change. And how is it that we can create an economy that that doesn't only measure success through GDP growth, but also looks at how people and planet are impacted. And so this broader agenda of economic systems change requires players outside of SMEs, in addition to SMEs, to step forward and to sign up to this process of measuring what matters, this process of accountability and transparency. And so in general, bLab has really welcomed these larger organisations into the fold, because they have signed up to a process that's beyond what other SMEs have signed up to. And what happens is they go through this this process of measuring their organisation in the same, through the same kind of, through about governance and environment and community, but then they also have to make a commitment to have their the headquarters, or their kind of often it's subsidiaries that are going through the process, and so the company, the head company, has to make a commitment to undergo the process, undergo the B Corp certification process in the future as well. And so these companies, if you are to look at the bLab website, what you'll see is that they're subjected to a greater level of scrutiny and a greater level of transparency. And I guess one of the principles behind the B Corp movement and this idea of using business as a force for good is that you don't have to be perfect. But you have to be committed to making change, and you have to be working on that change. And so I think it's all of those principles that have guided the decision to allow a company like Nespresso in. And I don't know myself the specific details about what you're talking about and how that fits into their supply chain and whether they've rectified it. But I do know that it's something that the standards and verification team would have addressed with them, because that's part of the process.
Thanks for explaining
so
that.
Thanks.
Yeah. That's all we've got time for. If you have other questions, feel free to attack any of us. And in fact, Kieran will be straight after this at Marque Lawyers space in the Big Open area, having a bit of a further chat about this subject matter with one of my partners. So feel free to drop in there with your lunch and listen to that. I think just to summarise, system change requires leadership. For businesses, that fundamentally that's about leading with purpose and setting an example of transparency, because that's the key to this whole thing. We hope to see more leadership from government. with our fingers crossed. But at the end of the day, really, the leadership and the big calls, the big sacrifices are personal. And Desiree is, a living, breathing example of heroism. And we've been honoured to have her, for her to share her story with us. And that is an inspiring story. And I hope you've taken quite a bit out of it. I certainly have. So I want to thank our panel, Desiree, Mele-Ane and Kieran, and thank you all for being with us on this session.